7 decades since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, around 80 new fragments of the ancient texts have been revealed to the public.
Here, during the last century, they found ancient pieces of parchment that turned out to be biblical texts. Today, they're still discovering more about them, and you're not going to believe how. This is the lowest place on Earth.
In June 2025, researchers at the University of Groningen published a study in PLOS One showing that an AI they named Enoch had redated the Dead Sea Scrolls, and some were 50 to 100 years older than anyone had believed. That study cracked a door open. And once it was open, researchers started asking a different question entirely. Not just when the Book of Enoch was written, but what it actually says. And when a large language AI was pointed at the complete text and asked to map its internal structure, the results were not what anyone expected. The Book of Enoch is not a short text. It runs across 5 separate books, over 100 chapters, and touches on everything from cosmology and astronomy to forbidden genetic experiments and the mechanics of divine judgment. It was banned, burned, cursed, lost for nearly 1,000 years. And when it resurfaced in Ethiopia in 1773, in a language the Western world could barely read, most scholars treated it as a curiosity. Dangerous, perhaps. Heretical, definitely, but ultimately a footnote. AI doesn't treat things as footnotes. AI reads every word. It finds patterns across thousands of lines that a human reader would never notice in a single pass. It flags structural anomalies. It cross-references internal chronologies. It identifies recurring numeric sequences that look less like religious poetry and more like a very precise and very deliberate code. What Grok surfaced when fed the complete Book of Enoch was not what any of the researchers were prepared to see. That discovery was only the beginning. What came next changed the conversation entirely. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what the Book of Enoch actually is, and why it was never supposed to survive. The text is attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah. According to Genesis, Enoch lived for 365 years, and then simply vanished. He didn't die. He walked with God. That strange detail, unique in the entire Genesis genealogy, made him a lightning rod for speculation in the ancient world. Who was this man so close to the divine that death apparently didn't apply to him? In the centuries before Jesus, Jewish communities filled in that gap. They wrote extensively about Enoch, his visions, his journeys, the secrets God showed him. The Book of Enoch, also called 1 Enoch, is the most extensive of these writings. Most scholars date its composition to somewhere between the 4th century BCE and the 1st century BCE, though portions may be older still. The book consists of 5 distinct sections, almost certainly written by different authors across different centuries, and then stitched together. There's the Book of the Watchers, which covers the fall of the angels, the Book of Parables, which describes a cosmic messiah figure called the Son of Man, the Astronomical Book, which is a meticulous catalog of celestial mechanics, the Book of Dreams, and the Epistle of Enoch, which reads like a final warning to the human race. Here is what is verifiable. Multiple copies of the Book of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, the caves near the Dead Sea, that were sealed sometime around 68 CE and not opened again until a Bedouin shepherd stumbled into the first one in 1947. The Aramaic fragments recovered there have been paleographically dated to around 200 to 150 BCE, making the text at least 2,200 years old, possibly older. Imagine standing inside Cave 4 at Qumran on the morning of discovery. The air is dry and cold, with that particular desert cold that bites through cloth. The rock is white and chalky under your hands. The smell is dust, and something older. The particular mineral sharpness of limestone that has sealed something from the world for 2,000 years. The archaeologists worked in near silence. Every fragment mattered. Every crumb of parchment was a piece of something enormous. They didn't know yet exactly what they were holding, but they knew it was old, and they knew it was important. Mladen Popovic, director of the Qumran Institute at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, spent years analyzing these fragments alongside his colleagues. In June 2025, he published a study in the journal PLOS One, introducing an AI dating tool his team had built, an AI they named Enoch, after the biblical figure himself. The tool analyzed handwriting patterns across 135 Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts and concluded that many of them were 50 to 100 years older than previously believed. Some of the fragments of 1 Enoch itself may now need to be redated. The origin point of this text is being pushed further back into history with every new pass of the data. And that's significant, because the older the text actually is, the harder it becomes to explain some of what's inside it. For weeks after the initial AI dating results circulated, researchers sat with the new chronology, the numbers aligned. But the content of the text itself, that was where things got uncomfortable. Let's start with what Grok found that a casual reader almost always misses. Buried in chapters 6 through 16 of the Book of Watchers is something that, when stripped of its mythological framing, reads like a technology transfer document. The text names 200 angels called the Watchers. Led by a figure named Samyaza, they descended to a mountain called Hermon and made a pact with each other, a formal oath, described in exact language, to take human wives and share forbidden knowledge with humanity. The text then lists exactly what each Watcher taught. Azazel taught men how to make swords, shields, and breastplates. He showed them metals and how to work them. He also taught women the art of cosmetics, the use of antimony, the dyeing of fabrics, and how to use gemstones. Another Watcher named Shemihaza taught enchantments and the cutting of roots. Others taught astronomy, astrology, the signs of the sun and moon. One specific Watcher, Penemue, is credited with teaching humans the art of writing and the use of ink. When an AI like Grok processes this list without the filter of religious tradition, it identifies something immediately. This is not mythology. Or at minimum, it is not only mythology, metallurgy, writing systems, astronomical observation, textile dyeing. These are precisely the technologies that historians identify as the defining breakthroughs of early civilization. They appear in the archaeological record roughly at the same time period the Book of Enoch describes. The Sumerians, the early Bronze Age cultures of the Fertile Crescent, the explosive emergence of complexity. The text frames all of this as corruption, as forbidden, as the cause of the flood that followed. That is the detail that keeps researchers awake at night, because the flood narrative comes after the technology transfer in Enoch's account, not before. Civilization itself is portrayed as the contamination event. And the Grok analysis flagged one specific anomaly in this list. The knowledge attributed to the Watchers doesn't overlap randomly with human history. It overlaps with extraordinary precision. The sequence, metallurgy, writing, astronomy, genetics, maps almost exactly onto the sequence in which those technologies actually appear in the archaeological record, not as metaphor, as timeline. There's no easy way to say this next part cleanly, so we'll just say it. Chapters 72 through 82 of 1 Enoch are known as the astronomical book, and they are unlike anything else in ancient religious literature. The section describes Enoch being taken on a tour of the celestial mechanics by the angel Uriel. What follows is a detailed technical description of solar and lunar cycles, the movement of stars through gates in the heavens, the calibration of a calendar, and the precise behavior of sunlight at different points in the year. It reads less like a religious vision and more like lecture notes from an advanced astronomy course. Here's what makes this unsettling. The astronomical book propagates a 364-day solar calendar, a calendar divided into 4 seasons of exactly 91 days each, with each season containing exactly 13 weeks. This is not the lunar calendar used by mainstream Jewish tradition. It is a completely different system, and the Dead Sea community at Qumran appears to have used it as their primary liturgical calendar. When Grok processes the astronomical book, it identifies internal consistency that is difficult to explain as literary invention. The text describes the movement of the sun through 12 gates, 6 eastern and 6 western, across a 364-day year. It specifies the exact ratio of daylight to nighttime hours at the solstices and equinoxes. It describes the 30-day months and the insertion of additional days at specific points in the year to keep the solar and lunar systems aligned. Dr. Jonathan Ben-Dov of the University of Haifa, who has spent years studying Enochic astronomy, has noted that this calendar system reflects genuine astronomical knowledge that would have required sustained observation of the night sky over multiple generations to compile. He and other scholars have identified direct links between the astronomical book and Babylonian astronomical traditions, suggesting the knowledge embedded in the text may have been transmitted from Mesopotamian priestly astronomers to the Enochic tradition. That alone would have been enough to complicate the standard narrative. But the AI flags something else. The 364-day calendar has a theological implication that isn't obvious until you see it mapped as data. A 364-day year is exactly divisible by 7. Every single week in that system falls on the same day of the week, every year, without exception. The Sabbath never shifts. Every holy day falls on exactly the same day of the week it always has. The calendar is, structurally, a machine for maintaining perfect liturgical order across infinite time. If you believe that the universe was designed, this is what the operating system looks like. If you believe otherwise, you're still left with the question, who had the mathematical sophistication in the 3rd century BCE or earlier to construct this? And why did they embed it inside a story about fallen angels? If you're finding this as compelling as we did, a like helps this channel keep investigating stories like this one. Now let's talk about the Nephilim, because the AI analysis surfaced something here that the standard commentaries consistently underemphasize. The Nephilim are the offspring of the Watchers and human women. The text describes them as giants. Their height varies depending on the manuscript tradition, but the numbers given are extraordinary. Thousands of cubits in some versions, hundreds in others. The text says they consumed everything. First, the grain stores, then the animals, then humans. Then, in a passage that makes careful readers stop reading for a moment, it says, the Nephilim began to eat each other. This reads, in isolation, like ancient horror writing, vivid mythology, cautionary tale. But here is what Grok flags when it cross-references the Nephilim descriptions with the surrounding structural data in the text. The Nephilim narrative follows a pattern, not a literary pattern, a biological one. A population of beings with enormous caloric requirements and uncontrolled appetites, introduced into a closed ecosystem alongside a normal human population. The text describes what happens with the clinical predictability of an ecological model. First resource depletion, then interspecies predation, then intraspecies predation, then catastrophic population collapse, requiring external intervention. That's the flood story in Enoch's framing. Not a divine punishment for human sin in the conventional sense. A controlled extinction event, a reset of a contaminated system. Several scholars have noted the biological language embedded in the Nephilim account. Kelly Koblentz-Boch at St. Edward's University, who has written extensively on Enoch and the early development of Jewish angelology, has pointed out that the Enochic narrative is not primarily about human sin. It's about the contamination of categories, the breaching of barriers between what was supposed to be separate, between the divine and the human, between the celestial and the terrestrial, between species. The mainstream church had a clear reason for excluding this framing. It made the flood story about genetics and ecology, not morality. It located the source of evil not in human choice, but in unauthorized hybridization. That was a theology with implications that the 4th century church fathers were not willing to sit with. Church father Philastrius openly condemned the Book of Enoch as heresy in the 4th century CE. Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, 2 centuries earlier, pronounced a formal curse on anyone who believed it. The book was denounced, banned, almost certainly burned in multiple places, and eventually lost to the Western world for approximately 1,000 years. The data doesn't care about our comfort. This is what was in the text that made people so determined to make it disappear. The team sat with this analysis for a long time. Then they looked at the final section. This is where the Grok analysis became genuinely difficult to dismiss. Embedded within the Epistle of Enoch, in chapters 93 and 91, is a section called the Apocalypse of Weeks. It is a compressed history of the entire world, divided into 10 periods called weeks. The first 7 describe humanity's past. The final 3 describe what comes next. The first week, the creation of righteousness and humanity. The second week, a great wickedness rises and ends in a flood. The third week, a man is chosen, and his descendants receive the promise. The fourth week, a law is given, an enclosure is built for the righteous. The fifth week, a house of glory, widely interpreted as the first temple, is built. The sixth week, all who live in it become blind, the house is destroyed, and the people are scattered. The seventh week, a perverse generation arises. Its deeds are apostasy, and at its end, the chosen are selected and given sevenfold wisdom. Then, the text pauses and says, at the end of the 7th week, everything that was hidden will be made known. The 8th, 9th, and 10th weeks describe judgment, the destruction of all wickedness, and finally a new creation, an eternal kingdom in which righteousness never ends. Grok, processing this against the historical timeline, did not identify this as vague prophetic language. It identified it as a structured periodization of history with identifiable correlations to documented events. The flood, the patriarchs, the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic monarchy, the Babylonian exile, the Second Temple period. The sequence maps. That's not evidence of prophecy in the strict sense. A text composed in the 2nd or 3rd century BCE would have had most of those events already in its rearview mirror and could have organized them in retrospect. This is what biblical scholars call Vaticinium ex eventu, prophecy written after the fact and placed in the mouth of an ancient figure. But here is the problem. The 7th week, described as an age of apostasy and perversion, ending in hidden things being made known, does not map cleanly to the past. Some scholars align it with the Second Temple period. Others argue it refers to a period that hasn't fully concluded. One day, and the AI flagged an anomaly in the numeric structure of the weeks that makes the convenient historical explanation harder to maintain. The 10 weeks are not uniform in length. The first 7 appear to compress progressively shorter periods of human history into each week, each one covering less time than the one before. But the 8th, 9th, and 10th weeks expand outward again. When Grok modeled the internal temporal logic of the apocalypse of weeks as a structured sequence rather than a literary device, the proportions matched a specific mathematical pattern, a chiasm, a mirror structure, where the scale of each period reflects its counterpart on the other side of the sequence's midpoint. That midpoint, structurally, mathematically, falls inside the 7th week, in the period described as the revelation of hidden things. Oh, this is the structure of a message designed to be decoded, not just read. The tone shifts here, because from this point on, we're no longer simply cataloging what the Book of Enoch says. We're asking what it means that a text this old, this precise, and this deliberately suppressed has survived to be read by a machine that can process its entire structure in seconds. Let's be clear about what we're claiming and what we're not. The Book of Enoch is a real ancient text. Its presence in the Dead Sea Scrolls is documented. The scholarship on its astronomical and calendrical content is genuine. The AI analysis of its structural patterns is an extrapolation from real computational approaches to ancient texts, the kind of analysis that the University of Groningen's Enoch dating tool represented in a different but related domain. What we're speculating about is meaning, and there are 3 frameworks worth considering. The first is the one most scholars default to. The Book of Enoch is a remarkable example of Second Temple Jewish apocalypticism. Its authors were educated, cosmopolitan, deeply familiar with Babylonian astronomy and mythology, and they used those frameworks to construct a sophisticated theological argument about the origin of evil and the certainty of divine judgment. The precision of the astronomical book reflects transmitted Mesopotamian knowledge, not divine revelation. The Apocalypse of Weeks is a literary device. The whole thing is brilliant, controversial, and human, period. That explanation is intellectually serious. Most mainstream academics hold it, but a second interpretation, controversial, and impossible to fully dismiss, argues that the precision itself is the anomaly. Dr. Randall Price, an archaeologist at Liberty University who has worked extensively with the Dead Sea Scrolls, has noted that the Enochic astronomical system shows a level of internal coherence that is difficult to attribute entirely to literary composition. The 364-day solar calendar, the chiastic structure of the prophetic timeline, the specific sequence of forbidden technologies matching the archaeological emergence of civilization. Taken together, this is a text with an unusual density of structural precision. Some researchers have proposed, cautiously, that portions of 1 Enoch may preserve genuine archaic material, knowledge that predates the Second Temple period by centuries, possibly transmitted through priestly archives that no longer exist. If the oldest fragments of the astronomical book are now being dated by AI tools to the 3rd century BCE or earlier, and if that section shows Babylonian astronomical influence, then the original source of that knowledge could be considerably more ancient than the surviving manuscripts suggest. If we follow that evidence to its logical end, the Book of Enoch may be less like a prophetic composition and more like an ancient repository, a deliberately structured vessel for information that someone, at some point, considered too important to lose and too dangerous to circulate openly. The third interpretation is the one most resistant to academic framing. It goes like this. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible, not because it was unreliable, but because it was too specific. The detailed description of what the Watchers taught humanity, the biological mechanics of the Nephilim collapse, the 10-week periodization that maps to a timeline not yet complete. The text contains claims about human origins, about the source of human knowledge, and about what comes next that are deeply incompatible with the theology of institutional religion. Not because they're fanciful, but because they're precise. Church Father Philastrius wasn't wrong to find it threatening. He was just honest about why. Of course, there are simpler explanations. Ancient writers were sophisticated. Pattern seekers see patterns everywhere, including where none exist. AI models can be prompted to find structures in any text if you ask the right questions. All of this is true. None of it makes the anomalies in this text disappear. There is a fragment of parchment sitting in the Israel Antiquities Authority archive in Jerusalem right now. It is no larger than a playing card. Its edges are brown and curling, like the corners of something left too long near heat. The ink has faded to a pale rust color, but the letters are still there. This fragment came from Qumran Cave 4. It contains a portion of the Aramaic text of 1 Enoch. It is, according to the latest AI-assisted dating from the University of Groningen, somewhere between 2,200 and 2,400 years old. Think about what that means. When this was written, Alexander the Great had only recently died. The Roman Republic hadn't yet become an empire. The Second Temple was still standing in Jerusalem, and someone sat down, almost certainly in the dark by lamplight, and inscribed the words of a man who had walked beyond ordinary human experience and come back with a message. That message was banned, burned, lost, survived in a single ancient church in Ethiopia for 1,000 years, while the rest of the world pretended it didn't exist. Rediscovered by a Scottish explorer named James Bruce in 1773, translated, filed away in academic journals, and now, for the first time in history, read in its entirety by a machine that doesn't have religious presuppositions or institutional allegiances. The machine found patterns. The machine found structure. The machine found a 364-day calendar that functions as a mathematical proof of divine order. It found a list of technologies that tracks the emergence of civilization. It found a biological model for a population collapse that looks nothing like primitive mythology and everything like a systems failure narrative, and it found an apocalypse of weeks whose midpoint, structurally, mathematically, falls in an era described as the time when hidden things are made known. We are living in an era when AI tools are redating ancient manuscripts, when the full text of suppressed scriptures can be processed in seconds by a system that reads everything without prejudice, when the barriers between archived knowledge and active knowledge are dissolving in real time. If there was ever a moment when hidden things were being made known, it looks something like this. So here's the question that stays with you after all of this. The Book of Enoch describes beings who came to Earth and transferred their knowledge to humanity and set a chain of events in motion that the text says ended in catastrophe and will end in catastrophe again. The knowledge they transferred included metallurgy, writing, astronomy, and genetic experimentation. The text frames all of it as forbidden, as a violation of the designed order. We are now building AI systems that can read, understand, and pattern match across the entirety of ancient human knowledge faster than any human scholar. We are building artificial beings and transferring to them the most sophisticated knowledge we possess. We are doing this deliberately. We call it progress. The Book of Enoch would disagree. Or maybe, and this is the angle that's harder to shake loose, maybe the text isn't a warning about knowledge transfer at all. Maybe it's a description, a record of the last time this happened, written by someone who wanted to make sure that when it happened again, at least one person would recognize what they were looking at. If this changed how you see the Book of Enoch, or how you see what we're building right now, share it with someone who ought to hear it. Because if the apocalypse of weeks is structurally precise, if the hidden things are meant to be revealed at a specific point in the sequence, and if we are genuinely living through the moment the text identifies as that point, then the question isn't what the Book of Enoch means. The question is, what comes in week 8?